All right, let's get into this. Welcome. Here we are with Ruth and Paul. Good to have you with me. And yeah, just tell me a little bit tell us a little bit about yourselves.
You give me. Well, Ruth and I both work together at a church in Exeter in England, St Leonard's Church. So I've only been here a year or so, but Ruth's been here for longer than that. And yeah, so obviously because of the church connection, that's sort of the ancient Greek connection. I'd done lots before. Ruth hadn't done any before. Sorry, you want to say some more?
Yeah, I hadn't done any before, but was interested in learning. Yeah.
Excellent. Paul, how much had you done before, Paul?
Actually, quite a lot.
What had you done?
So I don't know what it's like elsewhere in the world, but in the UK, the exam system, the sort of final part of high school exams is age 18. There's a sort of preliminary part at 16 called GCSEs, and I did GCSE classical Greek, so bits of the Odyssey and obviously lots of grammar and translation and that sort of thing. So I'd done quite a bit at school. Wish I'd done it beyond that, but I didn't. Then when I was training to be a pastor, obviously most seminaries require that you learn some Greek as well. But I've been doing something in the background. Yeah, well, hopefully they all do. I've been doing something in the background, so I'd been through the kind of standard Greek textbook that's used in England is one by someone called Duff. So I'd been through that in various settings a few times, and I'd been reading the New Testament in Greek, in a fairly incompetent way at various points. So then when I actually got to seminary, I was like, I'm going to start from scratch learning Greek again. So I really worked hard that year, like the summer before I started, and then did kind of test it out of that whole class. So I actually never did any Greek at seminary because I passed out of the whole thing. And then that first year, and I was still really diligent, I also kind of ground through that. There's a sort of intermediate book called Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics by
I know well.
I literally just read through that entire book and found out about all the different types of genitive and stuff. And then I was kind of still vaguely interested in it. Somehow stumbled across a few things that you'd written, Seamus, and was like, hang on, this does tally with my experience. Because although I'd done various things, reading various parts of the New Testament, even parts of the Old Testament in Greek, even parts of Apostolic Fathers and stuff in Greek, incompetently but trying, I was still like, I genuinely don't know this language, even though I have done a lot of work on it. And obviously now that you've seen me in class, you can testify to that truth.
Yes. I mean, it's humbling in a way. I think a lot of people have a similar experience, and now people who come in with some Greek experience, I tell them always not underestimate yourself, but be prepared to step back and do something easier. You'll feel a lot better if you do something easier.
Yeah.
And I know well as well. My second year seminary Greek textbook was to basically, in second year, we had to learn all of Wallace and be able to identify any word and fit it into whatever box Wallace had for it. So,
and I think actually just to say, I think that was part of my kind of epiphany. It was going through that and thinking, I mean, obviously the Greek genitive doesn't overlap exactly with the English word of, but there's a lot of overlap.
yes.
And thinking, hang on, as an English speaker, I've never even considered the fact that there are different senses of the word of. I just know that, and I never read it and think, oh, is this a kind of that refers to possession or something else? You just kind of know it. And I thought, hang on, maybe there's something different. Even if I'm not totally denying that there's a sort of
there's
work to be done,
right.
But I was kind of like, hang on, this seems at odds with my experience of language more generally.
And I think too. So I mean, these days I tell people, you can flip it around the other way. So I have I think it's an Oxford Grammar of English that's written by linguists, not by grammar teachers. And so you can flip it around and say, well, here are the 17 uses of the future in English that people don't think about, but you can analyze English in the same way if you have a use for it. My next question is, what tipped you over the line to say, oh, let's go study with Seamus?
Why do you say?
Okay, so I hadn't done anything at all. Once I knew I was going to do classes with you, I taught myself the alphabet using YouTube. But I was keen. I was keen to learn Greek, and I was keen not to do it by myself because I knew I'd be more motivated if someone else was doing it as well. So when Paul talked about your classes and the way you do things, I thought that sounded great. It sounded like the sort of thing that I'd be more likely to practice and would feel a bit more real and fun to do. So yeah, we signed up.
Excellent.
And for me, it was kind of perfect opportunity, thinking it would be, I sort of need, like Ruth, I felt like it would be better to do it with someone that I knew. And I thought, hang on, if Ruth wants to learn Greek, then why don't we just give it a go and sort of see how it works. So that was how I tipped her over the edge, I guess.
Ruth, for you, coming in having done nothing, which is, for someone else who's at the start, what can they expect from an experience?
It was pretty scary at first, particularly because there were a few people, well, most people in the class that had more experience in the past. But also, I did feel like it was a good easing in. It does take a few hours of prep before the lessons, but working through the book is a really helpful way of doing it, because it means that you kind of know what you're going to be talking about and what you're going to be looking at. So as long as you do a bit of work on translation with that before, it's great. And I feel like, Seamus, you're particularly good at sort of directing the questions that you ask to different people to match their ability. So I never felt too out of my depth with what you were asking me, even if I didn't always follow what you were asking everyone else.
I think one of the things is there is this difficulty in that even when you're in the very beginner class, there are people like Paul who are not beginners, and I do my best to pull the whole class down to beginner level. So, but it's sometimes difficult. Paul, what about you? What about your experience? If someone was coming in with your experience, what can they expect?
I think you could expect to feel pretty small in those first couple of classes, but in quite an exciting way, because particularly if you've already come to the realization that you want to know Greek, but you kind of don't really, even though you know lots of stuff about Greek. I think even though it is quite painful to be there and like, what's the word for yes? I can't even remember. And those sorts of things. I still think you're coming to the end of it thinking, okay, well, that confirms what I suspected, which is that there's a whole load more to learn. And actually, even though particularly that first, I don't know about, by week 2, I was like, okay, I kind of get this a bit more. But the very first class, I was like, wow, this is really intense stuff. And you kind of come away from it. That was fun, but that was also fun in the way that like boxing sparring might be fun. Yeah. And I would definitely say I was really glad that I was working it with Ruth, who I actually knew and regularly saw at work and stuff, because partly you could do a little bit of debrief and say, oh, okay, that was one. You generally comment on funny things that people have said, which I won't repeat, obviously. But 2, there's a sort of camaraderie in, right, we're trying to do this and not very good at it, and we're learning together. And actually, it's just been, Ruth's come from 0 to actually quite good, to the extent that now, like yesterday I was sitting in a meeting with Ruth and the rest of our staff team. Ruth had her phone on the table, and I was like, I wanted to comment about something to her, but I also didn't want other people to see. I was, change the language on my thing, send a Greek message. And I knew that Ruth would understand that because she actually does understand Greek.
In terms of your own Greek ability, how has it moved both of you along?
Well, I feel like I've come on pretty far. So obviously I knew nothing before, whereas now, as Paul said, I can understand, we can have mini conversations in Greek, which is quite fun.
What about farming? Yes, farming. excellent topics to discuss. Farming and yeah. What about the New Testament? Because so you've done 3 courses, you've done half of about another course, but we don't really touch upon the New Testament directly. How is that for you? Have you tackled bits of the New Testament? Are you trying to read it?
Yeah, so one of the things I've really enjoyed is in the Athanase book, like having the little sections of New Testament Greek at the end. I've really enjoyed looking at those. And I've also really enjoyed when there've been particular passages that we've been looking at church and things, when it's things that I think I'll know some of that. So if it's the healing of the blind man, or, you know, the parable of the sower, things like that, I have been looking up the text in Greek and kind of spotting the words that I know and that kind of thing, which has been really exciting. And I think we're quite keen, well, I'm quite keen for us to carry on looking at that a bit as well.
Yeah, so I really strangely at our church, there's this guy who grew up in Israel and is just like a fanatical and extraordinarily gifted linguist. And so already some of the other people who work here meet up with this guy and read the Old Testament in Hebrew. And it's really interesting contrast between the kind of classes that we've done with you and those things with this guy, because he obviously is truly, utterly fluent, having grown up in Israel, modern Hebrew speaker with a great grasp of the Old Testament as well. But he doesn't, but our questions, the way that we discuss it is primarily a kind of translation, you know, not in Hebrew, not in the target language thing. And it's really interesting contrasting those things and seeing how there really is a benefit, both from a language perspective, well, particularly from a language perspective, in discussing the language in language. And it's kind of interesting contrasting those things, but it is quite funny. So sometimes when Ruth, you know, say, "Oh, I don't know what to do. I don't understand this part from Athanase," I've been like, "Okay, well, let's sort of talk about it together." And I've tried to ask the questions that you so elegantly ask, Seamus. I find it impossible to ask the questions, but even that I think has actually been quite useful for sort of consolidating those things. The question you asked about how I've moved on.
Yeah.
I think it's given me a lot more confidence and aspiration to just work at the texts in the language. So I often read now, I mean, I'm a pastor, I often prepare sermons from the New Testament, and the Old Testament. I'll often read aloud, and, you know, for the sake of just comprehension and digestion, those texts in the New Testament Greek version, or in the Septuagint Old Testament Greek version. And you think, well, that Septuagint thing, that's kind of pointless, isn't it? Well, so many reasons why it isn't, but actually, even if it was, it would, from a language perspective, it's still sort of a valuable thing to do. So I think it's partly confidence of that, and partly, you know, I think my realistic goals about Greek and Hebrew, for that matter, are properly measured in decades rather than, you know, terms. Like, I'd really truly love to be, you know, very, very competent in those languages in 20 years' time, but I know I'm not going to be in 2 years' time. So I think it's just kind of gradually taking those little steps. Someone made a comment on some blog post you put up a few months ago, Seamus, about exactly this. If your target was to learn to be able to read the New Testament usefully, what would actually be a sensible strategy to do that? It wouldn't be, let's just read this one text and learn all the, you know, slightly weird, obscure vocab from that. It would be, let's read everything else. And then after 20 years, we'll come to that book and think, wow, okay, this is the book I've been longing to read all along. So that's kind of my goal. And I'm maybe a step further along towards that.
Yeah, excellent. I think just on the Septuagint thing, the two things, well, I find reading Septuagint in Greek incredibly interesting, because you can see the Hebrew underlying it, but you can also, to me, it gives us a connection that for much of church history and for many Christians throughout the ages, the Septuagint was their Old Testament and was their scriptures. That's what they were reading. That's what New Testament many of the New Testament authors were used to. As they read the New Testament, they would be thinking, the echoes of the Old Testament here are the Septuagint. That reason enough is reason enough to value it.
Yeah, well, and take the sort of most pertinent example of all, which is the early church fathers often talk about the name of Jesus, and they're basically like, look, this name was first revealed in the book of Joshua, and kind of we're all aware of that in some way, maybe that there's some connection between the name Jesus and Joshua. But when you read the Septuagint of Joshua, it's literally like Jesus. You're like, oh wow, yeah, they read this and we're like, it's the same guy, same name, and whatever the significance is to that, it just reminds you that they read it with it. It was very significant to them that this guy had the same name as that guy, and that's kind of lost to us, and we miss it unless we're looking.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much for joining me today, and also for being in my classes, part of the elite European crew, European African crew, let me say. It's been good to have you in those classes, and hopefully you'll rejoin us at some later stage. Yeah, thanks for sharing your experiences.
Thank you. It's great to chat about it.
Thank you.